Welcome to Dr. Alice Zhabokritsky, who is a CIHR Canadian HIV Trials Network Postdoctoral Fellow from Toronto, Canada, with a clinical and research interest in HIV and aging. So welcome, Alice, and I'll turn the stage over to you.
Thank you, Kate. Welcome everybody to the Silver Zone. This is very exciting to connect with you, even though it's just in a virtual format. It is my absolute pleasure to be here with you today and to share with you some perspectives from the CHANGE HIV study, which I will introduce to you in just a moment, and really try and explore the concept of aging well with HIV. I'm presenting today on behalf of the whole study team, but especially Dr. Sharon Walmsley, who is the principal investigator on the study, Rosie Clark, she's the project manager, and Ron Rosens, he's the community advisory board chair. So welcome. This is just a brief overview of what I'm hoping to cover today in the time that we have together. I did get a warning that our presentation might be a little bit interrupted because of some of the activities going on at the main stage in the Global Village. So please bear with us, and I apologize in advance if that was to happen. But I'm hoping we have an ability to chat a bit about where HIV and aging is at today, how the CHANGE HIV study has been developed, the thought process behind it, give you an overview of who has participated to date, and some of the preliminary results I'm very excited to share with you. And I'm hoping, even though this is a virtual format with kind of limited ability for us to interact, that you'll be able to provide me with a bit of feedback, and I'll share with you how we can do so, and I hope it works. So I did set up this poll. So if you do have the ability to use a mobile device to go on this website, pollev.com/changehiv004, or if you want to text changehiv004 to this number here to join, just to kind of have a bit of an interactive component to the presentation as well. And hopefully we can connect that way. So just so we have an idea if this is even working, if anyone is able to try and go on this link to let me know where you're joining us from today. It's so exciting to be on an international stage, and we already know someone's joining us from south of France, just to see if we're able to get this to work. And yes, if you are able to use the chat, please type in there, but I will type in the link here as well. Oops. I don't think I can actually. Anyways, here's the chat for it. Okay, so let's see if we're able to see any responses so far. I've seen some activity from Canada, from over in UK, we know south of France. That's great. So folks are able to link in.
We're working on it, Alice. Just give us 1 sec.
Awesome, thank you. I'll just hold on a moment to see. That's great. So yeah, I'm seeing some responses coming through. Yeah, so some folks in Europe, North America is what I'm seeing here. So that's great. So we can have a focus a bit on Canada of what we've been seeing here with our study, but hopefully the things that we're discussing can be applicable across the board. That's great. So I am curious why folks decided to join the Silver Zone today, so that I have a sense of what would be useful to discuss as we go through the study. So if there's anything in particular you're hoping to get out of this today, or you have any thoughts of things you're looking forward to in the silver zone, please let us know here, and I'll try to summarize them as I get the answers coming in. So I'll leave that open, and I'm just going to get going with the rest of the presentation, but yeah, feel free to jump in and add things on, but it seems like things are working. Okay, so let's talk about aging with HIV. There is a lot to be celebrated. You know, since the 1980s, when someone's life expectancy with HIV was under a year and folks were diagnosed in their early 20s, we weren't seeing people aging with HIV. So now, after 4 decades of intense research, effective treatments, advocacy to make sure people have access to treatment, being included in research and in the circle of care, we're now starting to see that the life expectancy for people living with HIV is approaching the general population, which is amazing. And in Canada in particular, we are seeing that the median age right now is over 50 for people living with HIV, and we're expecting for that to rise to over 65 in the next decade. So a complete transformation of the kind of dynamics of the HIV population. And we're seeing very similar trends around the world. So both in low income and high income countries, the number of people who are over the age of 50 now is rising, and we anticipate it's going to continue to rise, as well as the proportion of people who are over the age of 50. So really increasing numbers, new challenges that we haven't faced previously are around the corner. And it really leaves us with some important questions that remain unanswered at this time. What will it be like to live with HIV into older age? How does HIV itself and perhaps its treatments, some of those that were used in the past or now, how are they impacting and interacting with the aging process? What are the strategies that are going to support people living with HIV to age well? How do we adapt our approaches to support healthy aging? What does it even mean to age well with HIV? And you folks might have some ideas to share with me, I hope, during this presentation of what it means to you. And what do we do to empower people living with HIV, their caregivers, to make sure that we're optimizing health, quality of life, and ultimately independence? So these types of questions are really the inspiration and the driving force for the CHANGE HIV study that I'll be talking to you about today. It stands for Correlates of Healthy Aging in Geriatric HIV, and it is the first Canadian cohort of people living with HIV age 65 or older. And it was really developed as a response to these questions. And we're hoping through this study and ongoing work in this area, we're going to address some of these knowledge gaps around HIV and aging. So the goals for the study in terms of recruitment, we're hoping to engage 750 participants in the study. We're about halfway there. We are recruiting folks from 7 sites across 3 Canadian provinces, so BC, Ontario, and Quebec, with a mix of primary and tertiary healthcare sites where people are being recruited. And our goal is to include a diverse group of individuals of different sexes, genders, sexual orientation, ethnicities, and life experiences, so that we can really try to start understanding what are the needs and expectations around aging for people living with HIV. And the way that the study was designed was really to try and explore aging as a multidimensional state. And what I mean by that is that not just focusing on whether or not you have medical comorbidities, you take many medications, etc., really trying to understand the entire lived experience for individuals, which is very complex, as you will see. But we do so by engaging people in comprehensive assessments over roughly a 4-year period with multiple visits. That's in keeping with the WHO global strategy for aging. So this is a bit of a schematic of how we have envisioned this comprehensive assessment for HIV and aging, starting off with these various domains of health, and then really trying to fit them into the environmental and personal determinants of health. So expanding what quality of life might mean for somebody, what cognitive function might have an impact on the aging experience. How does social networks and social supports, how do those play into the aging process? And really trying to look at all of these domains with a lens that's aware and responsive to differences between sexes and genders, gender roles and gender identity, as we anticipate that these experiences might be different for individuals. So trying to be both inclusive and comprehensive in the evaluation. And as you see, there's so many components to these assessments, and that is on purpose. It's purposeful so that we can really get appropriate appreciation for the rich and complex lived experiences of people as they age with HIV. So in terms of the specific components of the evaluation, I'll review some of the main ones. So in particular, we start off with an in-depth assessment of various socio-demographic factors, social supports, networks, factors around loneliness. We review medical history, including things that are really important to an individual's function, especially as we age: hearing, vision, oral health. We review medications and their entire antiretroviral therapy history. We do assessments for the common geriatric syndromes or concerns that individuals can run into as they age: frailty, fatigue, physical capacity, falls. We evaluate some of the mental health and stigma related issues that may arise as people age, and we address cognitive function, which is a big concern for a lot of people as they're aging. We take a look at nutrition, food security, as well as the microbiome and how that might be playing a role into the aging experience. We look at sexual activity, sexual satisfaction, and more. So it is quite comprehensive, and it does involve multiple visits over the study period. So it's a big commitment for study participants to go through all of that. And we really appreciate the time that they dedicate to go through it. And as I mentioned earlier about the concept of healthy aging and whether or not we can measure it. So this is one particular interest, especially of mine, to figure out, can we measure healthy aging? And the reason to do so would be to see if we can see any trends over time. We can see if any of the interventions that we're going to implement to support healthy aging or try and improve healthy aging, can we improve these scores? So can we measure it? So it's not just an arbitrary evaluation. And to use this measurement in our study, we're using a validated score called the Healthy Aging Score. And the score is made up of 7 main health domains. So including quality of life, social supports, pain, physical and cognitive function, mental health, and chronic disease. So it is comprehensive. It does not include everything, but our hope by including these 7 domains is broad enough to capture the main aspects of aging. And once these various assessments are done, a score out of 14 is created. And then depending on how high or low individuals score on this healthy aging score, they are deemed healthy, intermediate, or poor aging. And studies that have been done to evaluate the score have demonstrated that these scores would correlate with things like mortality, healthcare utilization, frailty, etc. So we know that there's some meaning to these stages: healthy, intermediate, and poor. And it might just be something that can be easily used to identify somebody, to say, these are the areas that an individual is struggling, and maybe we can address these issues in a certain way. So that's the thought process behind trying to measure healthy aging. If you're able to join us online with our poll, I would really love to know what aging while with HIV means to you. So I'll leave this this part of the poll up for some time. So please, if you're able to log in and share some responses, I'll make sure to take a look at those as I go through the presentation. So I'll leave this up for a second if folks want to log in. And I'll move on next to give you a bit of an idea about our study participants who have generously shared their experiences with us. So far, about 336 individuals have enrolled. And before I give you an overview, I do really want to acknowledge the contributions that these individuals have made to the study. They've generously shared their time, they've shared their story with us, and without them, the study really would not be possible. So I do acknowledge that they really are the reason we're able to do the work that we're doing. So in terms of kind of the main characteristics for those who are involved in the study, the median age is 71, and we do have a nice distribution of ages. So kind of majority of folks being in the 65 to 69 age group and the 70 to 74, but we do have quite a few participants 75 to 79, and even some over the age of 80. So lots of diverse experiences that can be gained from that. In terms of gender, so majority of our cohort is male. We are actively trying to recruit more female and transgender participants, but certainly this is reflective of the HIV population in our treatment centers across Canada. So that's kind of that distribution in terms of ethnicity. So you can see here that the majority of the cohort is white. Again, more reflective of the local epidemiology compared to some other parts of the world. About 62% of the participants were born in Canada, and there is a very wide range of countries of birth for the remainder of the cohort. In terms of marital status, I thought this was very interesting. So you can see in these pink bubbles, so individuals that are not in any relationship at this time. So a large proportion who are single, widowed, divorced, or separated. So if we're thinking about kind of the social structures and supports that might be available to somebody as they're aging, this might play a big role, right? And here we're seeing the individuals who are married, common law, or with a steady partner. In terms of level of education, so we're seeing that, again, there's a big variety of individuals, but certainly a lot of folks have advanced degrees, some level of university or college preparation, and a few who completed secondary or elementary school. In terms of employment status, so vast majority of individuals are retired, not surprisingly, but we do see that some folks are still engaging in part-time, full-time employment, some volunteer work as well. in terms of the household composition, and again, this is a bit of reflection on what we saw with the marital status, we see that more than half of these participants are living alone. So again, if we're thinking about the supports that might be available or resources that will be available, this is something to consider as we're planning for the number of individuals aging with HIV to go up and up. In terms of the gross household income, there's a big variety, and this is in Canadian dollars. But what I'm hoping to highlight here is that about 1 in 5 individuals is living at or below the poverty line in Canada. So in terms of financial supports and resources from that perspective, that might be another consideration. And when we look at HIV specific factors, so on your left-hand side, in terms of duration of HIV infection, we have a nice distribution. So there's lots of individuals who are long-term survivors who might have very different experiences compared to those that have been diagnosed in the past 5-10 years, for example. So there's a big distribution along that, which will provide us with a lot of, I think, interesting information and potentially some differences that we might observe. And in terms of the CD4 nadir, so when do individuals start treatment? So there's quite a few folks who started treatment when their CD4 counts were very low, with a minority who would have started with their immune system in better condition with, let's say, a CD4 count over 300, 400, or 500. So in terms of some preliminary results of what we have observed so far in the cohort. So this healthy aging score that I introduced initially to you, so trying to see how individuals rate on those 7 domains of health, we find that it's almost like a thirds distribution in terms of how many folks are really would be considered having healthy aging with minimal issues around, let's say, physical, cognitive, mental health domains, intermediate aging when there are some challenges that they're experiencing, and poor aging where they're experiencing challenges in many domains. And if we really zone in on this group, we're seeing that the main things that folks are struggling with is their quality of life, social supports, again, thinking back to some of the demographics that we've discussed, mental health, which may be interrelated with the 2 above, chronic disease, so more likely to have more medical comorbidity, and pain. Okay. And interestingly, we found some important differences in the scores based on genders. So on average, women and transgender participants had lower scores than men. Okay, so when they were rated on that scale of 14, they had consistently lower scores, with about half of women and all the transgender participants having poor aging scores compared to men. So again, in the general group where most of the participant is men, it's about a third, and a third. But if we zone in on the women and the transgender individuals, it's really a big difference. So there might be something going on in terms of the lived experience, and this is something of interest that we're going to be exploring further in our analysis and in our work moving forward. But I think it's an important consideration to make. And if we looked at what made up that difference, why the aging scores were so much poorer among women, we found that although they had fewer comorbidities compared to men, it's the high rates of chronic pain and lower cognitive function scores that were really having a big impact on the way that folks were able to score on these scales. We looked at a couple of other factors that we thought might be influencing the healthy aging scores. And something interesting, which perhaps is not all too surprising, is that we found that scores were lower for those individuals who were retired compared to those who were employed or engaged in volunteer activities, really highlighting the importance of having connections. So having social and work-related connections, perhaps with employment, financial security as well, having an impact on this, but really driving home the point of the importance of staying engaged in our communities, and the positive impact that might have on the way that we experience aging. We didn't find major differences in the scores according to age. So it's not that the younger part of the cohort or older part of the cohort had poor scores. There weren't major differences according to race or country of birth. And really, in terms of those HIV-related factors, like the CD4 count nadir or the duration of HIV infection, those did not seem to have a big impact on the score either. So really, all of these factors that really are not modifiable by any intervention, they didn't have a huge impact here, but something like engagement in employment or volunteer activities might have. So that might be something to explore in the future in terms of interventions. And I'm just seeing here a question coming through in the chat about being explicit about pain and source of pain. So absolutely. So when we're talking about pain in the context of HIV, it is absolutely multifactorial. So there's so many reasons why there's higher rates of pain disproportional to the general population, which could be related to HIV or HIV treatments, right? So some of the earlier treatments that resulted in significant neuropathy and neuropathic type pain, which could linger on for years and years thereafter or be permanent, or in relation to some of the comorbidities that are more common for folks that are living with HIV. So if we're thinking about musculoskeletal type pain, neuropathic pain, pain related to trauma and abuse or mental health issues, all of those could be interrelated, and all of those make up that component of pain and pain evaluation. So thank you for that question. I hope that clarifies the source of pain. Multifactorial in nature. Okay. Another part of the evaluation is the cognitive assessment. So the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, or MoCA, is used in the study, and it's a comprehensive evaluation of cognitive function used as a clinical tool to identify folks who might have mild cognitive impairment or more severe impairment in keeping with dementia. So across the study, the 65% of participants had no identifiable impairment based on this testing, but 30% had mild cognitive impairment, right? So that's something important to pay attention as we're thinking and planning ahead for more and more individuals aging with HIV, and how does that impact the services that might be necessary, how individuals are supported, etc. And 5% met the threshold for moderate to severe impairment according to this testing. We did an evaluation of loneliness, and as we gather more information, it's going to be really interesting to see the impact of COVID on all of this, right? The study has occurred kind of in the middle of the pandemic. We started recruitment before and continued throughout the pandemic. So rates of loneliness might look different, and that's something that we're interested in exploring further once we get the complete cohort available. But at kind of face value, we saw that nearly a quarter of individuals reported a high level of loneliness. So not some level, but high level of loneliness. And that certainly is an important risk factor for the aging experience and having poor clinical outcomes. I want to talk a little bit about HIV stigma. That's another component of the evaluation and what we're interested in trying to understand how that's impacting the aging experience. So we looked at 4 kind of domains of HIV stigma, starting off with personalized HIV stigma. And you can see here that almost a fifth of individuals reported to have moderate to high level of stigma according to their agreement or disagreement with these types of statements. So that people I care about stopped calling after learning I have HIV, having lost friends as a result of their disclosure of their HIV status, people avoiding touching them because of their HIV status. So quite high. Even higher yet, the disclosure concerns and stigma around disclosure. So even in 2022, or when the study first started, a large component of individuals are having concerns around having to keep HIV a secret, feeling that it is risky to them personally to disclose their HIV status, and continuing to be very careful about who they're telling about their HIV diagnosis. So 72% is huge. So a lot of work and that continues to be needed in this area, and how this impacts the aging experience. And as we're seeing folks requiring additional help, let's say going into a retirement home or a long-term care facility, having to go through the disclosure experience again might be a really traumatic and challenging experience if this is the level of concern that we're still observing to date. So that's something to plan about on system base, so that individuals who are working and providing care in these facilities, they're educated around HIV, they're familiar, and they're aware of these disclosure concerns that might be present. In terms of public attitudes, again, still quite high level of concern around the public perceptions around HIV being dirty, being treated as an outcast, making people feel uncomfortable around them because of their HIV diagnosis. So still quite a challenge, and having an impact on a negative self-image. So feeling guilt around HIV, feeling worse about themselves based on others' attitude towards HIV, and feeling that they're not as good as others because of HIV diagnosis. So how this impacts mental health, social interactions, social networks, is certainly concerning. Next component of the evaluation that I'll touch base upon is around expectations regarding aging. So trying to understand how people envision themselves as they're aging. What do they expect in terms of their physical, cognitive, and mental health functions? We know based on studies that that type of perception has an impact on health outcomes and health behaviors. So, for example, if somebody has very low expectations about their physical function, they might not seek out services if they're seeing a decline in their physical function, because they might feel that this is what happens with aging. I should anticipate to have less energy. I should anticipate to have mental slowness as I'm aging, etc. So in terms of how individuals are going to behave is affected. And what we saw on average, our study participants had quite low expectations about their physical and cognitive function as they were aging. So that's something that perhaps could be addressed to empower individuals to expect more out of their aging process and seek the help that they deserve if there are issues that can be addressed. And in terms of mental health, it was moderate. So in terms of the types of expectation, it wasn't low or high. And for example, things around loneliness as people age, feeling depressed as a normal expectation of aging are the type of things that we were inquiring around for the expectations for aging. We also looked at sexual satisfaction among individuals who are aging with HIV, and we did see quite a broad distribution here in terms of folks being absolutely not satisfied, a little satisfied, moderately, very, or extremely satisfied. And this is only a component of individuals who are sexually active at this time. Those folks that are not or chose not to disclose kind of opted out of this questionnaire. But for those who wanted to share, this is what we found. And again, this might be something to be related to expectations around sexual function and satisfaction as folks are aging. And it's important to recognize that this is an important component of health and aging, and something that should be supported and explored with a continuum of care. So those were a few things kind of that I wanted to highlight about our study and our cohort to give you a flavor of the type of research that we're doing here in Canada to try and understand the aging experience for folks aging with HIV. This is the first Canadian cohort, people living with HIV age 65 and older. We're actively collecting information so that we can better understand how to adapt and support healthy aging in this population. And some of the preliminary data that I shared with you today suggested there's a significant proportion of people with HIV who are struggling and trying to figure out what are the challenges that they're experiencing through a multidimensional lens may help us better address their needs in the future and prepare for kind of this amazing increase in the aging HIV population, which again is something that should be and must be celebrated, but with the idea that we need to do better and prepare and be ready to address these needs for these complex interaction between the different domains of health and lived experiences. So if you have any feedback or comments, I'm not sure if folks are able to still type into the chat here, or if you want to join us online through the poll, please send in any feedback or comments. I'd love to take them. And if you would like to learn more about Change HIV Study, please do visit us on our website, changehivstudy.com. Perhaps you'd like to be a participant if you're living near one of our study sites, and we'd love to hear from you. So I'm just seeing a comment here. Do you think that the model of HIV care should change, and if so, how? Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you so much for that. I think what we're starting to see with some of these preliminary results and what we're observing clinically is that the needs of people aging with HIV are very diverse, and we need to become more aware and prepared to deal with these things. So in terms of a model of HIV care, I think ensuring that we are providing services in a comprehensive environment where it's easy to access the services that are required to support healthy aging. I'm talking about social work supports, nutrition supports, physical therapy, occupational therapy. So making it kind of reflective of what we're seeing in geriatric medicine, where it's really comprehensive and addresses various needs in one setting. I think that would be really beneficial. And also transitioning that towards the community and planning for where people are going to live as they're aging. What are the supports that are needed in the community to make sure that individuals are well supported, are able to maintain their independence, their dignity, regardless of the challenges that they're facing. Thank you for that question.
Thank you. Alice, are you open to questions from our in-person audience here?
Absolutely, please.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Alice about her presentation or HIV and aging in general? Yes. Okay. I'm going to pass over the mic. Here we go.
Hi there. Thanks very much for the presentation. I'm Gary from London.
Hello.
And I'm interested in the fact that the differences that you saw in terms of outcomes were poorer for women and trans community,
Yes.
but not people from different ethnic and racial backgrounds. And certainly one of the things that we see in the UK is in relation to health inequalities, the challenges in relation to accessing good healthcare treatment, and then some of the additional support services that might be useful, is that ethnicity is often a barrier to services and to healthcare. And so I'm reassured that you haven't seen that there, but I guess I know the numbers are quite small at the moment. So I'm guessing that in terms of recruiting that other half of the cohort that you're looking for, that maybe you're thinking about trying to preferentially recruit kind of from a diverse ethnic backgrounds.
Yes.
That was a question. It was kind of a question.
Yeah, no, and thank you for raising that. I completely agree. You know, we do anticipate to see some differences just based on observational studies, as you mentioned. And so being able to recruit a rich, diverse cohort that's going to reflect the various ethnicities and races that would give us enough numbers to see the differences, I think is absolutely important, because we don't want to make a false assumption just by having those low numbers, that's not an important factor. So we want to make sure that we're powered to observe that type of difference. So thank you for raising that. I completely agree with that comment.
Alice, I don't know if you want to also mention Dr. Walmsley's comment in the Q&A box at the bottom. Can you see that?
I do see it. So yeah, so Dr. Sharon Walmsley, who's the principal investigator for the study, thank you for joining it. She's mentioning that we have universal healthcare. That may be why. So absolutely. So differences in healthcare systems might be playing a role as well. So we may not see a difference even if we're powered, but I think in either case that we need to make sure that we have sufficient numbers to look for it, to make sure that that the information we're gathering is accurate. But yes, having universal access where kind of the barriers, financial barriers to accessing healthcare are hopefully reduced.
We have another question for you. Here we go.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I'm very interested in this topic because I'm working on aging with HIV. So I have a composed question, which is the definition that you choose to define the aging well? Because as you know, there are many definitions, and like there is a controversy on what is really aging well in general, and it's quite difficult to define it with the HIV.
Yes.
As we know also that when we speak aging with HIV, the CDC and the WHO considering people having 50 years and plus are those aging with HIV. But in your presentation, you considered people having 65 and plus.
Mhm.
Why this orientation or this choice? And the last point, in this study, did you consider the period that people get or having the HIV? I mean, I think that people having HIV for like 10 or 20 years are not the same like people having HIV for like 3 years. So is this can affect aging well with HIV? Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Sorry, I'm just writing down the questions to make sure I address all of them. So I think the first part of the question was about how we measure healthy aging. And that is a big kind of question and research interest of the study is to figure out, can we effectively measure it? Because as you alluded to, there is no one universal definition of healthy aging, especially in the HIV community. And so when we were developing this study, we tried to find a validated score that is going to be kind of comprehensive enough to try and capture the aging experience, recognizing that there's going to be limitations to it, but seeing if we can validate it in this study to capture a broad range of experiences, making sure that if there's changing in the aging experience, we can capture it, like there's going to be a difference in response to an intervention, for example. So trying to validate and understand this aging score is one of the goals of the study. And we selected the one that we selected because it included these broad domains of health, which are in keeping with those defined by WHO and other agencies, with the goal of seeing is that comprehensive enough. But of course, there is no one definition, and if we can validate it here, then perhaps this is a tool that can be used across other studies. So there's a bit of kind of translation between different studies to see the impact of different interventions and how aging is being experienced around the world and in different settings. So I hope that answers part one. Part two is about the definition of aging. So you're right. In a lot of settings, greater than 50 has been considered the kind of the aging HIV age, and that's reflective of how we have how long we've had people aging with HIV. So initially, when life expectancy was much shorter, somebody living to age of greater than 50 was considered to be kind of a geriatric or aging cutoff. Now that we're seeing that life expectancy is approaching that of the general population, we really felt that selecting an age that is equivalent to what we're seeing in other kind of general population cohorts, so geriatric, older age in general is considered over the age of 65. So we really wanted to explore it on par with that, because that's where we're moving. We're moving towards folks living similar lifespan, and we want to be able to explore it not just for those over the age of 50, but really focusing on that older cohort, understanding that that's where we're heading with HIV and aging. So that was the reason behind that cutoff selection. And finally, a question with regards to duration of HIV infection. So yes, absolutely. If you recall, it was one of the factors that we explored in terms of how long somebody has lived with HIV. So if you can see this graph here, so absolutely right. Like somebody who has lived with HIV for over 35 years is likely to have very different lived experiences, traumas, exposures to medications, comorbidities, et cetera, compared to somebody who was recently diagnosed or infected. So this is one of the variables that we are exploring to see what kind of impact duration of HIV infection might have on the aging experience. And perhaps what we'll find is that somebody who has had HIV for greater than 35 years will need different type of support or intervention than somebody who was recently infected because of those key differences in their experiences.
Thank you so much, Alice. Any other questions? No. Okay. So Alice, I want to just say thanks so much for being here. I know you can't see us, but we appreciate it. And,
Thank you.
you know, I'll connect you with people if they have follow-up questions.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kate. And thank you for all the questions. That's fantastic. You know, I wasn't sure how much we'll be able to engage. So to hear from you is really helpful. And I appreciate your time for stopping by the Silver Zone today. Thank you.
Enjoy your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.